I don't know how well I'll do. I started this beard right after Christmas, and so I've never had one before. And so, anytime I mess up my words or don't say the right thing or exaggerate, it's probably the beard's fault. So, bear with me on that. Thanks for coming. You may have guessed I went to the Cal College as well. That's when it was affectionately known as the Cal College rather than, a fabulous university like it is now. I grew up in Dallas, lived in a small place right outside Cockrell Hill in Dallas, went to a local high school there in Dallas, decided to come to A&M. At that time, the entrance requirement for A&M was 800 on the SAT. I think I made an 813 or something like that. And so, there wasn't any reason to take it again. I was good. So that was back when it was not necessarily an honor to get into A&M. It was just, okay, this is an unusual school. This is where I'm coming. And one thing I wonder about, I came down here and decided to be a microbiologist. I did a semester and a half in microbiology. I wanted to write one sentence in a textbook was going to be my goal in life. And so I went to my first microbiology class, and the professor came in, and he had on, the white lab coat and no shirt, and there was hair coming out of his lab coat, and his hair was messed up, and he said, "I apologize. I spent the night in my lab. I was studying some fungus, and my wife was over in the plant pathology lab, so I didn't have time to clean up. Please excuse my appearance." And he said, "Today we're going to talk about fungus." And so I thought, okay, not terribly interesting, but I'll try to keep up. Well, he got real excited about it. And there were 3 boards, and y'all probably never experienced this, but there used to be these green boards up there with chalk. Does anybody know what a chalkboard looks like? Really? You don't? Okay. Anyway, we didn't have technology like this that you could put on the board. They wrote everything on that board, and there were 3 of them, and he'd look at his watch, and he was writing, and he'd go over here and write, and then he'd go back and erase this board, the first board. Well, it got so bad that he'd write something up there, and then he'd erase it. And everybody started complaining about it. And so we didn't have time to take notes, so he decided, okay, so he started writing around the wood molding on the board, the notes. Of course, we all kind of gave up. And then he got so panicked, there were concrete blocks, for walls. He started writing on those concrete blocks. And so I'm just curious, have any of you ever changed your major? Okay, you probably know what I'm talking about, that sometimes you feel like this isn't what I need to do for the rest of my life. And so I'd been working in a warehouse hauling hardware, which is like machine bolts and heavy, galvanized hardware and poles and things like that for utility companies. And, there'd be ice storms, there'd be tornadoes, and we'd have to go in the middle of the night and get those people supplies and things. And I thought, man, this is pretty cool. And I can kind of talk to these linemen, and, I felt like I fit in with those people. So I changed engineering and graduated with an engineering degree. It was a minor engineering degree. It was called Engineering Technology with Electronics. And then I had to decide what I wanted to be, and people asked me to be a salesman. And I thought, I don't want to be a salesman. Back in the day, you used to go buy shoes, not online, but people would sit down in a chair and they'd put their foot on a stool, and somebody would sit on that stool and they'd try on shoes, and some of these people would say, "Oh, I wear a size 6. Well, they really wore a size 8. And so the salesman would have to cram it on there. And I thought, I don't want to deal with the public. No way. So I thought, maybe I could sell engineering, because I'm really not selling people or emotion. I'm selling facts. And that's what's important. And if I have more facts, if I'm more experienced and I know how to do things better than all my competition, I'll do well. So this is me trying to, fit in. This is what's called a pad mount transformer. I'm sure you recognize those. They're in most of the subdivisions and houses. That's what the electricity comes into. And in this cable that I'm holding in my hand, that's 7,200 volts to ground once it's connected up and once it's energized. And what this does is change this down to either 122 or 240, which you can use in your house without blowing things up. So what I did to sell things, I'd go in and tell people, I know you never dealt with underground utilities before. If you'll buy all this from me, I'll help you put it in. And so I thought, I could probably read the instructions as well as anybody. So I'd go out there. I got a college degree. So I'd go out there and, read the instructions and find out how to install all this stuff. And so that's the way I started my sales career, was trying to learn everything that my customer did in order to make his system work. And that way I could talk to him one-on-one. We could talk on the same level. This was how big our company was back then. It had started in 1932, and there were 4 salesmen at the time. We covered a lot of the Texas area. And as time went on, by about 2006, we had gotten to where we had quite a few more locations in quite a few more states. We probably had 150 salesmen. We worked not only with the underground distribution, but we installed and helped and sold, I should say, substations. We also did these big transmission lines like you see that go across country that carry large amounts of power. These are at like 345,000 volts. We did fiber optics, like you see in your telephone systems now, how to splice those. We did gas as well, because a company called Encore up in North Texas bought one of the local gas companies, and they had to install gas pipe and the fittings and things like that. And so we got involved in all that. And this is me talking with one of the engineers. I did quite a bit of work on this particular line in that I represented the manufacturers, and they were doing the designs going from glass insulators to what are called polymer or rubber insulators. And so there was different electrical characteristics, physical characteristics between glass and rubber. And so I really geeked into this stuff and, loved trying to make them fit and serve the purpose. It was just really a blast for me. My poor wife would have to listen to me and drive down the road in places and go, wow, look what they did. And, anyway, most of my life's been boring. As I said, we'd grown to this size. We were probably selling somewhere around 80 million a year or something like that. In 2006, that was a pretty good number. And we decided we probably ought to cash out. I had always felt like coming to Priester. I was one of the principals. I was there for some reason. I really didn't know what, but I'd done really well with Priester. I'd made a lot of money, but I felt like I was supposed to do something else, supposed to give back. So I went with a new company and helped the transition where we folded Priester Supply into the company that purchased us. But I still wasn't fulfilled. And so I thought, what do I know how to do that somebody else doesn't know how to do, and where could I be valuable? And I thought, you know what? I bet I know more than most people in Africa about electricity. I'm going to electrify parts of Africa. So I was able to make a contact with a gentleman that was head of UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief, Sam Dixon. And I said, Sam, I probably called him Mr. Dixon at the time, but I said, Sam, would you support me if I were to do some solar lighting in some little villages? And he said, sure, I'd be glad to do that. Would you do something for me first? I said, sure, anything. And he said, well, we've got this hospital in Liberia, Uganda, Liberia. Would you be willing to restore that? It was kind of damaged in a civil war. And, I had a lot of pride, and I thought, well, sure, that's not a big deal. I can handle that. So, yeah, I took this on. Let me give you kind of an idea what had happened. There was 14 years of civil war in Liberia. At the time, Liberia was probably the most developed country in Africa. But these are shell casings on the street. And there were 250,000 people killed. And this was so severe, it went into Sierra Leone. I don't know if you've seen the movie, it's probably too old for y'all, called Blood Diamonds. And it's about some child soldiers and what happened to the people there. And you just will not believe how cruel people can be to each other. And so this was the atmosphere we were going into, that I had agreed to, not really knowing or understanding what I was going to do. Do any of you know where Liberia is? How do you know?
I spent some time in Uganda, so I know Liberia.
Okay. Well, Liberia is on the west coast of Africa. Monrovia is the capital. The bishop at the time's name was John Ennis. They have American names. They have a town called Buchanan. They were slaves back in the 1840s in the U.S., and people paid their way to go back to Africa and set up this country. So they were very proud of their knowledge and their heritage from the U.S., so they copied our Constitution. They took their names with them, which were American-sounding names, and they formed one of the first republics in Africa. This is a picture of the hospital. Looks like little potholes. These are bullet holes. This was the boys' dorm. This was the other part of the hospital. The country had divided into warlords. There were about 14 different factions, and 2 of them were across from this hospital, shooting at each other. So this hospital was severely damaged. This is a community, Ganta, of about 450,000 people. Just to give you an idea, this hospital was started in the 1920s by a Methodist doctor and missionary. I didn't know how large it was. Does anybody have a concept of how big 781 football fields is? Well, that didn't dawn on me when we got to doing this. It's as big as Central Park, and it was about 52 separate buildings. And I put together a crew of people, 9 of us, to go over there and repair this. I figured 3 weeks was enough. Went over there with my 9 guys. I was the only one that had traveled extensively throughout the world, so I should have known better. We had one other gentleman that had been to Vietnam, which is not really, a pleasure trip. All the rest of them, only 2 of them had been outside of Texas. And so we boarded a plane in Dallas, DFW Airport. We flew to Newark, then we flew to Brussels, then we flew to Freetown in Sierra Leone. And people would empty off like at Sierra Leone, and they'd close the cabin and they'd say, "Don't be alarmed, we're going to fumigate for bugs." And so they came down through the aisles with this fog stuff. and it just fogged the whole thing so you couldn't see the seats in front of you. You know, you question if it kills the bugs, is it? Anyway, we were a little concerned, but we jump off the plane and we see the facilities. If you look closely on this, you probably can't see it, but there are holes up in here, and that's a hole the size, it was about 3/4 of an inch. That's like a .50 caliber machine gun. And if you're not military minded, back in World War II, that's what they mounted on airplanes and tanks to shoot down other airplanes. It's a pretty powerful weapon. And they had numerous holes in this, this water tank. This was the generating house at the time. But Caterpillar had donated 2 large generators. And they ran off diesel, which was common in Liberia and still is. And so our job was to get the power from those generators to the individual houses without losing too much power in transmitting that. Line loss is what it's called, and make it usable. We do something a little different now, but back then we were fortunate enough there was going to be an Australian engineer that we were familiar with going to be in the neighboring country. So we hired him to go in and map all this facility. And so he drew us pictures and measured everything and told us, you know, all the distances. And so from that, plus, here's a layout design of what we put in. Up with this idea, which we thought was genius. Any of y'all ever heard of a spreadsheet? Yeah, I got everybody on that one. What we did, we sent this spreadsheet over there and we said, okay, in this building, how many light bulbs do you have? How many hours a day do you use those light bulbs? What's the wattage? Do you have any motors? Do you have a refrigerator? You know, what does the nameplate look like? And so we collected all this data and summed that data. And so from there, we could plan how big our load was going to be. And we could also plan how big a wire and equipment we needed to get it there. Pretty basic. This is just one of the spreadsheets of all the material we had. We found out over those distances that if you just take it out of that generator at 240 volts, are there any engineers in here? Oh, okay, so y'all know what 240 volts are, right? Okay. So, and you know about line loss, IR drop, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Anyway, if you take that 240 volt and just go a mile down the street, when you get down there, if you think of a garden hose that's really long, by the time it gets to the end of that garden hose, the water just kind of drips out the end. And that's what happened with that voltage or that electricity that was coming out of there. You know, the lights would come on brown and the fans would just kind of turn about like this because there wasn't any electricity when you got there. So what we did, we took a transformer like this. Y'all have probably seen these around shopping centers and things. Normally what you do is you take that transformer and you bring in like 7,200 volts and it does its magic and it comes out at 120 or 240, something you can use. Well, our generator was doing 240, so we thought, well, we're going to do things wrong. There's no National Electric Code there. So we fed in the low side, which was the 240 volt side, and we stepped it up to 7,200 volts. And we spread it throughout that whole system, and that kept us from having a large just loss in line loss, which deteriorated to the electricity to the point that it was just water dripping out of hose. We had a good stream by the time we converted it back to a useful voltage. This is the amount of material that we shipped in the containers. we still never really realized what we had done. We ended up filling 2 containers. It was 63,000 pounds of material. I'd never shipped anything overseas before, but can't be that hard. So we blocked everything up. It was put on a ship like this, taken out of Arlington, Texas. It went to Houston, then to Spain, and then to Monrovia. And we were supposed to pick these containers up right at the time that we arrived. Why did we need to come over there and do all this? Well, this is what the electric system was at the time. These are all colored wires, and what they had done out of their generating house, they ran a wire to this building, to that part of the building, that building, all these separate wires, and they didn't have poles, they hung them on trees. Well, every time a storm would blow through, in the operating room, they lost power. So, number one, you lose power, you don't have lights to finish the operation. You also don't have air conditioning. So what you do to keep from passing out in all your protective gear is you open the windows. Well, that lets in contamination. You can't have fans because there's no electricity. So it was really a desperate situation. That's why we were called in. The doctors just said, you know, we're losing so many patients. It's just brutal. You can see possibly all the lines strung on these particular poles. This is a mess of wire in here. If any of you know anything about electricity, this was the neutral, the system neutral. All the wires were bundled together in a big mess. It had to all be redone. So we had our containers. All our guys went into Ganta to start their work. It took me 3 days to get those containers out of port. It's just, when you're dealing in other countries, they don't have the same Western clocks that we have. They don't have the same, and I'm not judging here, but they don't have the same ethics. When you have to fight and scrape for everything to survive, sometimes you don't always do the right thing. We found that. I finally was in the manager of the port in Monrovia's office. And I had basically been sent there by the president of Liberia. And I got mad at him because he was telling me, it'll be another week or so. And I got really aggravated and said, I'm sorry. He said, we've spent all this money, we bought all these supplies, we brought these people. We care about Liberians. Does anybody here? And he sat there and looked at me, and I thought, I'm going to be arrested. But he turned around and he made a phone call, and he said, you have an appointment tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock with the Minister of Finance. She's going to sign all the waiver papers to get your containers out. They'll be out, this afternoon, that afternoon. So we took off 150 miles for Ganta. We're so excited. Got there, told everybody the good news. We were ready to go to work. Woke up the next morning, no containers. Okay? We've got 3 weeks to do all this. So we get to the point where we're really desperate. And I wrote a book about this. I've got this at the back, but just to kind of tell you where we were. That night, we were sitting and sweating without the safe water and food we'd packaged in our containers. We had no way to get anything we might need, and we were wondering where to turn. We all realized we were going to fail if something didn't change. Right before breakfast, we all drowned our hands and arms in hand sanitizer. Then we stood around the table, only touching elbows, with arms extended straight out from our shoulders. Our forearms turned upward at the elbows at 90-degree angles. Several years ago, there was a popular wall poster of a kitten hanging for dear life on a wire with only his front paws, and the caption read, "Hang on." Our hands were cupped like we were the kittens hanging there, and that morning's prayer went something like this: "Dear Lord, we've done our best, but we can't do this. If you want this done, you're going to have to make something happen. Amen." It became a ritual that we still do for all our projects. We had stepped out of our boat, let go of the sides, and gave up control of the project. At that point, we had to acknowledge we weren't smart enough or committed enough to overcome these obstacles. So we got through that day, we looked over the system, we went to bed, and then when we woke up, out through this fog, we could see something was out there. And as the light came up, our 2 containers were there. It was very heartening, but then we realized you can see how tall those truck beds are in comparison to the height of this man. This weighs 6,000 pounds. How are we going to get that off? We had thought about this and thought about this and thought about shipping forklifts and cranes and things, but it didn't work out. We'd kind of heard a rumor that there might be some UN peacekeepers that maybe had something that could help us, but we'd had no contact with them. We were just totally distraught. 6,000 pounds. Anybody got an idea how you get that off? Well, that same day, we're walking the grounds again, and here comes this army truck pulling by. What are those guys doing? Well, they're going to draw water from our well out there. They're a military battalion, UN peacekeepers from Bangladesh, and they're going to draw water from our well to take back to their compound. Well, do they have anything like a forklift or something? We don't know. Can we stop them? So when they came back, we stopped them. And the guys go, "We don't know, you'll have to talk to our major." Okay, would you tell him we need to talk with him? We get a call back. At 10 o'clock, the major will be here to discuss this. So I've always wanted to command troops in a grand battle or something like this. So, this was my opportunity. And so he had these guys come out and erect these tents in a conference room there. And so I'm up there preaching, why we need this and everything. And I go through about an hour worth, and he says, "Well, I can't make that decision. You'll have to come talk to our commander." Okay. So we got an appointment with their commander that afternoon, and we go into these double-wide trailers. They're air-conditioned, and all their officers are in watching the World Cup game. And the lieutenant colonel there, Lieutenant Colonel Huda, said, "Would you like something to drink?" "Yes, sir, that'd be great." "Then would you like dessert?" "Yes, sir, we'd love to share dessert with you." Finally, "Would you eat with us?" They do things backward in Bangladesh. And so he and I are up at the head table, and he looks at me and he said, "So what are y'all doing?" And I explained to him about the hospital and the surgeons with the lights and what we're trying to accomplish. And he said, "Well, where'd all the equipment come from?" "Well, we paid for it. We're donating it to the people in Ganta." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Well, you've got these people lined up over here. Who's paying them?" And I said, "We're all volunteers." And so he stood up, he clinked his glass, and he said, "Gentlemen," and he looks at his officers on this side, he said, "You will do absolutely anything you can as long as it does not interfere with your normal duties to help Power from the Sun complete their project." So, okay, what have I done again? Where do I go?
Make sure it's on the little arrow on the right.
That arrow?
Yes, sir. Ah.
So we walk out in the yard, and there's a forklift. A huge forklift, plenty of opportunity. And so, we have new best friends all of a sudden. Here are these guys from Bangladesh. They're Muslim. The officers spoke excellent English because Bangladesh was part of India at one point, which the British Empire controlled that area. Then they became part of Pakistan. There was a war between Pakistan and Bangladesh, and so they separated into their own country. But, just unbelievably good luck. Everybody has their own opinion of how to get things done, and there was a lot of discussion a lot of times about how are we going to do this. But we finally got through that. We used the forklift and got this off. This is me trying to be an African to balance stuff on my head. I'd like to go back on that. So now I've got to go back here. Okay. Here we're hooking up into a hospital and we're making the connections, and this is the electrical department for Ganta Utilities. We spent 3 weeks with these guys, and I've never had more fun in my life, all of us. We would, as you see here, we'd get up about 5 in the morning, we'd have breakfast, we'd start to work at 7. We'd work all day, taking 15, 30 minutes for lunch when we could. We'd stop about 6 or 8 o'clock at night for dinner. And a lot of times we'd have dinner with the Bangladesh UN peacekeepers, or we might visit with some of the staff at the hospital, and we'd go to bed at 10 or 11 at night. And that's what we did every day. One of the things we knew is that if we left that facility without explaining how it worked and how to fix it when it went bad, it would be useless for them. So we spent a lot of time in doing training, in showing them how to do things and working with them. Now, they were extremely, the Bangladesh as well as the Liberians, they were suspicious that here come these Americans to tell us how to do things. Well, what you got to do is, if you're there doing physical work, you got to get down there right in the ditch or the trench with them and work with them and work alongside them. And there's a trust that develops. And you'd be surprised how much we learned from them how to do things. Little tricks, it's like, well, I never knew that. But we also showed them things. And that's just that blending of culture that there's just no way to describe it other than live it. But you've got to respect each other and each other's knowledge and history. This happened to be our security guard at the time. He chased people off our equipment at night with that stick. He's fairly short. This was our group that was installing meter bases on the walls. One of the gentlemen that went with us, he designated himself the king when he got off the airplane. And of course, everybody called him King, King Harold. And this girl needed to be pushed to the school, which was about a mile every day. Well, they would stop out front, and Harold would take her and push her wheelchair out there. And Harold took care of all these guys, and he gave them a little bit of swag most of the time, you can tell. This particular gentleman went home with one of the Liberians, and we told him, be really careful what you eat. And so he said, I just felt so rude, I had to eat it. It was a fish that had probably been dead for a week, and they had boiled it in some water, and so he was lost for work for about a week from being sick from the fish. One of the interesting things that happened to us, the Bangladesh every day at 10 and 2 o'clock would pull up in a ragtop truck, and 2 guys would jump out with AK-47s on the side and stand guard as they lowered the tailgate, pulled out this plastic table and the chairs, and they'd come find me, and we had tea because that was their British heritage. Really had a great time getting to know those folks. I still correspond with, he's now a lieutenant colonel, Oh, well, I lost his name. I know his boss. But this was kind of interesting. At their compound, they wanted to be close to home, and the Bay of Bengal surrounds Bangladesh. So they had this pond. This is a little one-man boat out in the middle of it, and up here it says Bay of Bengal. And it just kind of made them feel at home that they had something to remind them of where they were. This was a finished result. We got all this done in 3 weeks. We left. It's kind of like, God, we've done all we can do. We stepped out of the boat. We didn't concentrate on what our situation was, but what the goal was, what the quest was. And from that, I learned from a guy in our church that as long as you're doing something for somebody else, it's amazing how people will help you. If you're doing something to help yourself, they're not quite as inclined a lot of time, only really good people. But if your purpose is to help other people, it's amazing how friendly and together people can become.
A United Methodist bishop from a war-torn African country is in Arlington tonight to thank a handful of volunteers who likely just saved thousands of lives. They did it by building a power system for a hospital and school in Liberia. Channel 8's Jim Douglas says it is just the beginning for an upstart charity.
It takes people power to bring electrical power to rural Liberia. 9 volunteers from the Arlington area brought 5 miles of cable, 17 transformers, 40 meter bases, a lot of muscle, and years of experience with American power systems, including work on the new Cowboy Stadium. They took it all to Africa this summer to electrify a hospital run down by 14 years of civil war.
Thousands of lives have been saved, and hundreds of lives have been saved already.
United Methodist Bishop John Ennis came to Arlington to thank the leader of the project.
Before I had the beard.
You can heal people, you can feed them, but if you think about it, if you don't have electricity, it's very difficult to get out of the underdeveloped world.
Steve Vincent sold his utility supply company and launched a new charity he calls Power from the Sun. Vincent dreams of something like Habitat for Humanity, only providing power instead of homes.
Liberia has 18% employment.
The hospital in Gata, Liberia now has the most modern electrical system in that country. Steve Vincent hopes it's just the first of many to receive power from the sun. In Arlington, Jim Douglas, Channel 8 News.
That ran about a year after we returned. We had gone back for another project, which was in Banga, the seminary there to electrify those homes, the seminary. There's a high school kids live there. This is one of our guys. One of the fun things is all the kids come up and, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And want to look at your tools, and the interaction with the people is just, it's so good for all of us. We also did a project for the former Methodist bishop, who was also the vice president of Liberia at the same time. We did a school for him in Liberia that was all solar, and went over there and spent 3 weeks doing that project. So we've done about 3 pretty major projects in Liberia. We also have gone to Honduras, one of the poorest areas of Honduras. There's an orphanage. This was our first. It's for underprivileged children. There's a Dr. Bryant that was a dentist in Allen, Texas. Are you familiar with?
No, sir, I was just following along.
Okay. Because a lot of people have been down there from the Allen area, from that Plano Allen area, to help with this orphanage. These are special needs children. Just to give you an example, there was one child that had fallen in a fire, and he couldn't get out, and his leg became welded to his chest. And so Dr. Bryan took care of him and brought him back to the U.S. for about 5 operations, and now, he's running around with all the rest of the kids. But you can imagine in a location like this, you've got some people with some severe problems, maybe epilepsy at night if you have no lights, trying to deal with that. And so we came up with we thought we were the first, we still think we are. We took our shipping container and we located it on the site where we're going to have the generator. And we put the generator in that. We cut cable exits. We cut vents in the side and mounted air vents. And that shipping container became our generator house. And that's been probably 10 years since we've done that one. This particular location is also down there in Honduras, close by. These children have, I guess, first right to go into this particular school called IVA, and it's a junior high and high school. They have about 500 kids down there. Again, in the poorest area of Honduras, the Atlantic side. We were down there about 3 years ago, and we were told that because they had had electricity for 2 years, that the missionary student was accepted into West Point, and 7 of their students were accepted into the Honduran Naval Academy, and 7 were accepted into the Honduran Air Force Academy. And that's because of electricity, because that opens up the rest of the world to learning. You know, I know all of y'all are really tired of distance learning, but you know, if it's the only thing there, it can be a life changer. This is us, you know, electrifying the second floor. And again, we involve all the students. You know, they were there helping us dig the ditches, covering the ditches up. We taught some of them how to splice the wire together. We did another orphanage. I moved down here about 3 years ago, and I took 3 professors from A&M so they could get a feel for what we do. And we did another orphanage down there, Mama Tara's. They had not had electricity of any type in 3 years. And of course, they have little small babies that are in little playpens outside with flies all around. They had no fans. And so when we installed this generator inside and showed the superintendent how to operate this, all of a sudden they had lights at night. All of a sudden they could study with their children, or they could access the internet. And the fans would blow those flies away. You could sleep at night under a fan. You know, some of this stuff we just take for granted when you go flip this switch, and we have all the conveniences anyone in the world could desire. You know, what have we accomplished? Well, we hope we've changed some lives. I've got some real good friends throughout the world in places that, you know, I never would have guessed when I grew up in Dallas. That's where I would be, or here at A&M. This happens to be the president of Liberia, President Sirleaf. She won the Nobel Peace Prize. This was the Bishop of Liberia. This was Dr. Brian down in Honduras with one of the children that he's adopted. One of the fun things we did there in Ganta, we found out that there was a group from Austin coming about a month later. And so we instructed all the kids that if you really want to be popular, when this group gets here, they're from Texas. And everybody in Texas greets each other with "gig 'em." And so, you know, I'm sure the Austin people knew where that came from, but I'm off track again. This is the current project we're working on. It's Mayu Hospital. It's about 10 miles in a van from Nairobi in Kenya. Nairobi is a nice developed city. Shocking. developed after what I had been through in most of my tours in Africa. But this hospital sits in an area of 450,000 people that is as destitute and poor as, you know, anything I've seen in Liberia. There's some amazing things, though, about that hospital. It was a more developed type hospital than we had seen in the past. You can probably see all these little dots. These are the buildings that need electricity. And we had gone over there in late February, something we had never done. We actually went to the site to see what it looked like. 3 of us did. We had gotten to the point with a lot of these other facilities, we would look on Google Earth and spot the facility and ask people to say, yep, that's what this is. And we would then use that to figure out what our distances were. We'd fill out that same table to come up with our loads, and we'd do all our designs and buy all our material without ever having been there. Just show up with it and put it together. This time we went, we were coming back March 1st, going through Germany through Lufthansa, and our flights were canceled. And so we rerouted through Istanbul. And one of the things we need to do with this one is Kenya Electric Power serves them, but they've got a really big demand charge. They charge you for the maximum amount of power that you use during a day, not the average. And that's pretty common here in the U.S. as well. It's fair, it makes sense, but what we needed to do was shave that peak. And so we designed a system that about a third of their peak load would be served by solar. And we're just going to take the solar panels. They will generate electricity. We'll change it into an electricity that you can use, DC and AC for engineers. We'll also then have something that blends the power from Kenya Power with this facility and then serve this compound. Now you can also see that this compound has some pretty antiquated wiring, and so once we get this finished and COVID goes, we'll take another team over there, probably 10 to 20 people, and we will pull new cable in through all this location and wreck out the old cable. And this should be a hospital that should have electric power good for 20 years. You know, it'll be able to take care of CT scanners. They'll be able to have an air-conditioned ICU. We're working with a company that a doctor from Houston formed that's the most marvelous thing I've seen working in Africa. He has 37 hospitals right now that he's a consultant for. And he consults them on administration. He stays with them on getting medical talent. He also does infrastructure, and so it all blends together. And so they've never had anybody that can do electricity before. And so we're real excited to maybe partner and team with these guys for in the future to be able to work in these other hospitals and possible future hospitals, because they stay with these people and they really make them a first-class facility. Just to leave you with a few thoughts, you just never know where your life's going to take you. You never know what you're going to be called to do. And so many times it's like, I just don't think I'm qualified to do this. But for me, at least, there's this strange feeling that came over me, and I kind of equate it to Peter being called out of the boat. I never thought about this. It was just like, okay, I'll do this. How do I get this done? And it's still that way for me. I'm doing some things with this hospital I've never done. I don't have the experience to do. Same with all the other guys. But like I said, if you're doing something for somebody else, God is there with you. And I'm an engineer, and I believe in facts. And I believe in cause and effect. But boy, I can't explain how we've gotten some of this done. And so I'm just hoping that you, in your lifetime, will have the opportunity that we've had to transform the world.